Hello, this is Ryan Lee, and this is the Just Individual Assessment for Evelyn Duncan, who was the farm tech working during the patient harm incident. So prior to performing the Just Individual Assessment, it's important to do a wellness check for Evelyn Duncan. Because given the gravity of the situation, it's important that she's in the right mental state for her to be able to undergo this investigation. So following an interview with her, these were her responses. So, in terms of being psychologically and physically capable of being able to provide care right now, she said that she's okay to keep working. She's not at risk of self harm right now. She said she's doing okay. In terms of managing her physical, psychological, and social stress, she said that she's sleeping okay right now, and her energy isn't far from normal. In terms of having a peer or family support system, she said things are fine at home. She has a supportive husband and a friend who's also a farm tech who she's been connecting with. And she has access to professional counseling. We've provided that with her already. And she's declined the offer to access the employee and family assistance program that we have. And she also has access to professional protective associations. And she's been in touch with the Canadian Pharmacists Benefits Association. So with that said, we can proceed with the just individual assessment, starting with step 1, which is the chronology of events table. This is an abbreviated chronology of events table to show what events immediately led up to Evelyn's error. So on April 21st at 4:40 p.m., one of our farm techs called in that she's running late due to car issues, so Evelyn told her that she would cover for her. At 5:10, a patient called to see if their prescription would be ready by 5:30 and was told by Evelyn that it would be closer to 5:45. Evelyn printed the labels and attached them to the pill vials immediately after this conversation. She placed the stock medications behind the corresponding labeled vials, but she was disrupted due to needing to help a customer out in the pharmacy. And then she continued filling the prescriptions and left them for our pharmacist to check. Now at 5:45, same day, the pharmacy tech that had car issues arrived and was updated on where things were and what the status of everything was. And our patient arrived to pick up their prescription. The pharmacist did not open the pill vials to check, but they checked the stock bottles against the vials. And they spoke to the patient to clarify the dose of the warfarin and asked if there were any questions. So now that we are reminded of the context of the issue and that Evelyn's mistake in this situation was filling multiple prescriptions simultaneously, it's important to establish who we're going to interview to gain some perspectives and opinions on this issue. So starting with the patient and the daughter, they're the ones that are going to be most affected by this, and they are the first victims of this mistake. The pharmacy personnel, so the pharmacist and the other tech that was running late, and then the farm tech peer that is from a different pharmacy. The reason why we're getting a peer is because it's important to know how others would respond in the same situation with the same information and understand what standards or norms exist, because this might demonstrate that black and white rules might not actually be the standard. So holding people to that may not be appropriate. And having a peer with similar experience or training can provide the most comparable comparison. And looking at this Venn diagram, you can see that there's overlaps in terms of the benefits that interviewing some of these people can confer. So the patient and the daughter and the pharmacy personnel, they can provide information on the sequence of events. So this can help to establish and add to our current chronology. The pharmacy personnel and peer pharmacy tech, they can provide perspective and opinions based on professional experience. So those that do the similar job as Evelyn can illuminate what she might have been thinking or what sort of stresses there may have been or influences. And then overall, speaking with each of these interviewees would shed light on system factor issues that lead to adverse events that go beyond just this one mistake and just one individual. So each of these interviews have already been conducted, but here's how I prepared for the interviews. It's important to have a plan going into these interviews so that they're the most impactful that they can be for the assessment. So 3 things to consider were to interview the patient and the family, so her daughter first, It's important to have insight into the events leading up to the events that Evelyn was involved in to provide the earliest information of the chronology, make sure that everything is accurate in the timeline and that there's nothing else that we're unaware of. And then to clearly state what information is needed from each interviewee at each interview. This reinforces what needs to be gained from each interview to establish if disciplinary action is appropriate, or if the gained information on standards of practice and context support Evelyn's actions. So this just gives an idea for each interviewee what we need to gain from them for this assessment. And using open-ended questions was important as well. This enables interviewees to provide as much information as they can and answer questions that were not known for me to ask. So allowing them to have just open dialogue can be very revealing. And now, 3 things to be prepared for to be fair when interviewing a pharmacy tech peer. These were things I had to think about so that there wasn't any bias and the use of a peer was accurate and authentic and not just performative. So it's important to include a peer who has a similar level of training and experience as Evelyn. If they're not similar, then you're just assuming that this is a comparable comparison, which may not be fair to Evelyn. And to provide the peer with the same information Evelyn had and known system factors at play at the time, so that they have everything at their disposal that Evelyn did, so that they can make their decision based on that. And to ask probing questions to gain an understanding of what is normal or usual in practice and what others would do in the same position, and if Evelyn's actions were acceptable. Because just because there's a certain standard in our pharmacy, it doesn't mean that it's a standard everywhere, and a mistake such as hers may be the norm of conduct in other scenarios or environments. So it's important to see and get that insight from a peer. It was also important to recognize biases that I may have at this stage, just to be aware and cognizant of how that may influence my decision making. So the biases that I can see are that I have a good working relationship with Evelyn, as she's been an employee for 11 years at this pharmacy. I don't have the same training or experience as Evelyn as her manager, so I can't put myself in her shoes exactly. I'm aware of all the information, including information that Evelyn did not have from other individuals that I've interviewed, and I'm aware of the patient outcome, which can be a major issue with hindsight bias. So the plan to manage these biases are to focus on the facts. I'm not going to let my personal connection with Evelyn influence my opinion. So I'm basically going to treat this like it's an external review of a case study. I'm going to look at the decisions made from Evelyn's perspective. So hindsight and omniscience are a luxury that Evelyn did not have. So I'll take this into account in how she acted. And I won't take into account the patient outcome. I have to think of Evelyn's actions within a narrow time frame up until the patient's warfarin overdose. Doing this just helps to isolate exactly what Evelyn did and the direct effects of it. So for decision 1 of the just individual assessment, these were the interview results that helped to answer some of the questions. So was impairment a contributor? No. Evelyn does not have a medical condition and was not under the influence of drugs or alcohol at the time of her decision. Would peers have behaved differently? Yes. So the preparation of multiple medications at the same time in order to save time, this was the problem at hand. Now, when asked the personnel at my pharmacy, Alice Chin, the pharmacy tech that was running late, she said that she rarely does this and not in recent times, and she knows that it's against pharmacy policy. As for our pharmacist, Vijay, he rarely does this and maybe once has done this in his entire career. For the peer, they outlined an iterative approach that involves filling each medication separately, and they believe that filling prescriptions for the drugs of different strengths at the same time is against their pharmacy's policy, and they confirmed that the medications of different strengths are stored similarly in their pharmacy, and the layout is similar, but acknowledges that the design is lacking and is not conducive for avoiding distractions from various sources. So in summary, was impairment a contributor? No. Would peers have behaved differently? Yes. So it's important to continue with the just individual assessment. So step 2, I have laid out the problems identification table. So specifying the problems, suggesting options, and determining if there was a vital difference in what the outcome would have been. So the first problem was that Evelyn printed and attached all of the medication labels to empty pill vials at the same time. Instead, Evelyn could have waited until she had filled one of the warfarin prescriptions before printing and attaching the other medication label. Would this have made a vital difference to the outcome? Probably not. The vials were empty at this point, so they were still unlinked to an actual pill, so you couldn't have a mix-up yet at this point. The next problem was Evelyn retrieving both warfarin stock bottles, both the 1 mg and 5 mg, from the medication shelf at the same time. Evelyn could have waited until she filled one of the warfarin prescriptions before retrieving the other stock bottle. Would this have made a vital difference? Probably. The stock bottles are very similar, so any initial checks to confirm the strength would be negated if they were swapped in the drug preparation area. So that's why it's policy to start with one medication, follow it through all the way to the end, and then work on the next prescription. And then Evelyn left the stock bottles behind the filled pill vials, resulting in VJ checking the stock bottles against the pill vials. Instead, Evelyn could have returned the stock bottles to the medication shelf after filling each pill vial. Would this have made a vital difference? Probably. If the stock bottles were back on the shelf, then VJ would have been forced to open the pill vials to check, as there would have been no other indication or indicator of what was in each vial. So now with decision 2, we have to decide whether this was human error. So the problems that I just mentioned, they can be grouped together because they're essentially going to have the same classification and justification. So that is non-compliance. And the reason for this is that the actions were intentional and they were defended as supposedly standard practice when busy by Evelyn. So she can't really pretend that she didn't know that this was not how things should go, because she herself was saying that this is what they usually do when they are busy. She did mention that she's vaguely aware of the existence of the pharmacy's policies on how prescriptions should be filled, but she doesn't actually know what those policies are, otherwise she would probably not have done this. If she claims her actions were conditional upon how busy it was, then that shows that she knows it would normally not be good or safe practice. So she knows that it's incorrect to do so. And personnel with less work experience, such as Alice or VJ, who have not been working in our pharmacy for that long, they were aware of the policies, and they also made note that they seldom fill prescriptions all at once, even when it is busy. So even given the circumstances, it's still not a decision or action that would cross their minds to try to save time. And this would be considered an outcome-driven non-compliance. She was trying to prioritize speed, trying to get more prescriptions filled quickly, trying to reduce the wait times for patients over the actual patient safety, which comes as the result of being very methodical and systematic about checking and following policy and processes that help enable this. So no, this would not be human error. So in summary for decision 2, were the actions intentional? Yes. Were the actions known to be incorrect? Yes. Evelyn stood by her decision, claiming that this is just what they do when they're busy, and she knew that these were incorrect, otherwise she wouldn't have put that condition that she only does this when it's busy. So it's important to continue with the just individual assessment. So now that we've assessed Evelyn's actions as non-compliant, with step 3, we're determining what the motivation for the non-compliance is. So as a reminder, the actions were printing and attaching labels to pill vials at the same time, retrieving both stock bottles at the same time, and leaving the stock bottles behind the pill vials. Now, was there an acceptable opportunity for benefit? Yes. The goal was to be efficient and overcome the busyness in the pharmacy. She wanted to serve more customers and reduce wait times, fill more prescriptions. So this was an acceptable opportunity for benefit, but nonetheless, it's not a safe one. The primary intended beneficiary is Evelyn, so the individual that is being assessed, because she's wanting to save time. And a secondary motivation that you can infer from this is reputation. So by saving time and by being an efficient worker who's able to make sure that patients aren't leaving bad reviews of the pharmacy or having long wait times, she's wanting to uphold her reputation as a good pharm tech and ensure that she has job security as well. So while the patient may benefit from the faster execution of tasks in the pharmacy, it's not really a priority compared to the benefit of patient safety. So in the end, it's really only Evelyn that can benefit from her actions or inactions here. So now we're at decision 3. The non-compliance assessment matrix comes into play here to determine whether or not disciplinary action is necessary based on who the beneficiary of the actions were and any system factors influence. So let's start with the system factors. In this case, distracting pharmacy layout, different strength medications stored close together, similar labels for different strength medications, and a lack of labeling on the medication shelf can be considered to be system factors that led to the mix-up of the warfarin strengths. Now, when considering the system factors influence, it is overall moderate. While these system factors exist, the interviews from other pharmacy personnel, both in our pharmacy and the peer, suggest that they would not have played a large part in their decision-making, as the overriding priority is to follow policy, because the alternative would be to jeopardize patient safety for the minor gain of not having patients be impatient due to longer wait times. Now, with that said, these system factors, while they are the norm, leave room for improvement so that more safeguards exist to protect against decisions like Evelyn's from being able to become hazards. While Evelyn should have followed policy in order to carry out the filling of prescriptions safely, if things like distraction-free environment or proper labeling or different labeling on the strengths, things to just make it easier to identify what strengths everything is. If this was in play, then maybe the mix-up wouldn't have occurred, even with her efficient process that she used. So yes, there are improvements that can be made. Now looking at the motivation for action, it leans slightly towards the individual more. The shortcut taken by filling the prescription simultaneously was not considered to save a significant amount of time, yet the consequences are quite significant for the patient. So here the risk outweighs the benefit for the patient. So overall, only the individual, so Evelyn, can really be considered the beneficiary of which her actions were. So this results in an orange location on the matrix, and this means that the decision was tolerable, but restorative action is still necessary to prevent further errors from occurring. So part of decision 3 is checking biases to make sure that I'm not being prejudiced against Evelyn and her decisions. Part of this is one of the main biases that could be at play is illusion of free will. So the belief that the individual made a conscious choice to perform below the standard of perfection. Essentially, this is saying that I would be biased in my decision making by holding her to an unattainable standard that is just not reasonable. But I think that I have done a good job of debiasing this proactively by having the interviews of the other pharmacy personnel and peers, because they suggested that filling prescriptions simultaneously, while it's not outside of the realm of possibilities of handle the busyness, they wouldn't support it being done as a regular strategy. And Evelyn made note that this is just what they do normally when it is busy, so that's not a good thing on her part to say that this is the norm in terms of busyness. It should definitely be a last resort and something that shouldn't be necessarily a priority, since safety is the priority, not speed. So with decision 3, now we're talking about restorative action and what needs to be done to improve upon this incident. So additional training, I suggest, is required for Evelyn. This is based on Evelyn's claim that they often fill prescriptions simultaneously when busy. When talking to her peers and other personnel within the pharmacy, they have denied this as being the case. This isn't the culture, and it shouldn't be. And because Evelyn doesn't know the policies when she was asked, this definitely shows that she needs to brush up on the policies and maybe gain an understanding of why they are policies, because they are the safest approach. Even if they may be more tedious, they help to guarantee or at least better ensure safety. And then in terms of just improving upon the systems factors themselves, Evelyn simultaneously filling prescriptions in and of itself could have been done properly. It might not have been a result. It might not have resulted in such a poor outcome if some of the systems factors were addressed as well. So improved labeling on the medication shelf. This is based on the need for an additional level of clarity for where medications are, so that even poor decision making is mitigated from becoming error prone. And then as well, trial isolating the drug preparation area by swapping it with the phone and computer station. This leaves the drug preparation area in a corner of the pharmacy that is pretty isolated from the phone calls and conversations that might be happening as customers are coming into the pharmacy. And this is based on the need for drug preparation to be as distraction-free as possible. In Evelyn's case, she did have to attend to a customer in the middle of filling the prescription, so her efficient method may have worked if she had just been focusing on that task. So in general, though, policy should be followed, but these can help to safeguard against those cases as well. So now we have to talk about disciplinary versus restorative actions. There's a reason that restorative actions are what I chose for this case instead of disciplinary. Disciplinary is punitive. It's meant to be considered a punishment, and it deters repeat offenses, and it does so by making an example of the individual. And this is reserved for non-compliant and unacceptable actions. In this case, Evelyn wasn't doing something that was completely unacceptable. It's not like no one does it or no one does it ever, but it definitely should not be considered the norm or something that should be brushed aside. So restorative actions are necessary. They're non-punitive. They protect and enhance future performance. So in this case, we're considering it a learning experience. Evelyn can learn from this so that she can adhere to policy better in the future and form safer strategies if it does get busy. And it's reserved for errors and non-compliant actions. So in this case, it's a non-compliant action. Now, as for disciplinary actions, what options did I have if I chose to do this for Evelyn? A verbal or written warning, a suspension, a fine, a demotion, a finding of unprofessional conduct by a regulatory college, dismissal or a loss of license, or a referral to the justice system for consideration of criminal proceedings. Now, all of these are quite severe and drastic, so it's important to make sure that these are only being done when absolutely necessary, and that context has been taken into consideration and biases have been acknowledged. So I asked my sister, who is a PharmD from Waterloo, about support following a patient harm situation. So basically what exists, what is necessary, and then what gaps there are because of that. So pharmacy is a self-regulated profession, and she said that each province, pharmacy, and hospital is different with different standards. And similarly, there's no standard of support. So there's no consistent regulation on what needs to be done for those that are involved in a patient harm situation. There's not really anything that they've been taught in school about support or advocacy for them. A lot of pharmacists are on contract, so this means that they don't have any benefits, which also means that there's no expectation of support. So in general, pharmacists don't really have an expectation that they will have support if something goes wrong on their end, because in general they don't have any benefits and they are quite temporary in a lot of their positions. And there's no culture of advocacy for second victims. So in general, when I brought this up to her, there wasn't really any culture of this that's been talked about. And she even asked her friends about the culture in their pharmacies and environments that they've worked in, and really it's kind of all on the second victim to seek help as they need to. And in general, it's kind of a blame game, unfortunately, where the organizations will not support those involved, and they will just point fingers. So this is a major gap, but it's not necessarily one that is seen as a gap because it's not really seen as something that is necessary for them. There's no perceived need for support. It's just how it is in their eyes that if they do something wrong, that it will be on them, and there won't really be much support as a result. So clearly, support for a second victim is not necessarily something that is culture right now. Organizations still have not caught on to this concept and are still going to need a lot of change and encouragement to start thinking about the second victim and what they might need. So these are my top two recommendations after a patient harm situation. Now these can be done both by the individual themselves or facilitated by the organization. So whether or not organizations catch on, this can help second victims to help facilitate their own recovery forward. So first is connecting with a trusted colleague. So this can help them to feel less alone and gain empathy from those who understand. They would be in a similar position and similar rank, and they would know exactly what stresses or influences there may have been in their decision-making process, and then also to participate in disclosure. So this would likely require more support from the organization, but it's not unlikely that they would not allow this. For patients and families to hear a sincere apology and hear exactly what went through the individual's mind in their decision making, that can be cathartic to hear that they accept the apology, because there's a lot of guilt associated with becoming a second victim after their decision making. This can result in thinking that they're not competent or can't be trusted. So hearing from the patients and families who may surprisingly be accepting of what happened, that can help to relieve some of that stress that the person is living with. So that concludes my presentation on Evelyn and the decision that I made to only do restorative action for her. Disciplinary action is not necessary in this case, but I think that it sparks a conversation that restorative action can be a possibility for individuals who are in these scenarios where they're involved in patient harm situations. It doesn't need to straight away go to disciplinary actions or legal actions, depending on the severity of the case and what the intentions and motivations were. And just everything is context dependent as well. So as we move forward, more organizations can hopefully adopt similar approaches where there are supports in place for their staff, and staff are informed of how to avoid going into these scenarios to begin with, but also how to come out of them positively. Thank you.